everyone, it's Angelica Cole. I just wanted to talk to you today about a case that's very near and dear to my heart. It's the murder of 11-year-old Gannon Stauch. I followed this case since the beginning and will continue to follow it very closely as Letecia heads into trial, so please keep posted for those updates. There has been so much that has happened in this case, so for this video, unfortunately, I'll only be able to give you the very basics. Gannon was an 11-year-old boy that lived in southeastern Colorado Springs in a community called Lorsen Ranch. He lived with his dad, Al, his stepmom, Letecia, and his biological mom, Landon, lived in South Carolina at the time. It is understood that Gannon's dad is in the military and he worked out of town quite often, so most of Gannon's time was spent with his stepmom, Letecia. Letecia states that on Gannon's last full day alive that she took him to hike at Garden of the Gods and then she took him to eat at his favorite place of Burger King. On January 27, 2020, Gannon was reported missing by a neighbor. It is believed that Al, his dad, was trying to reach him but was unsuccessful, so he contacted the neighbor, who then made the first post on the Lorsen Ranch community page. It is believed then that Tisha made the first call to 911 and then reported Gannon as a runaway. And this is really important because it determined not only how Colorado Springs police would handle this from the beginning, but it also raised a debate on how these cases should possibly be handled in the future. Nonetheless, the Lorsen Ranch community jump into action and they brainstorm and develop a plan of action. And at first, Tisha is just updating people and she's acting like she's very concerned and she's responding to questions. But then you start to see the first piece of suspicion where the neighbors just don't seem like maybe they're fully believing everything that Tisha's putting out there. As the community started to organize searches, there was just more and more red flags rising up. It seemed like there was one person who was always notably absent, and that's Tisha. She didn't seem to participate in any of the searches. People online started to notice that her story really seemed to constantly change. She couldn't quite nail down the details. She had a little bit of a lack of emotion. This just really started to set off the fire for the neighbors. So even though some of the neighbors were starting to get suspicious, there were lots of people who were still trying to give Tisha the benefit of the doubt. People wanted to believe her. They wanted to believe that Gannon was okay. The problem is that her story just kept changing. One minute Gannon was a runaway. The next minute he had stayed home sick but was still allowed to go outside and go play. Nothing was adding up, and this has been the case since the beginning of this trial. Her story just keeps changing. And then, out of nowhere, we got the biggest bombshell of all. Tisha's sister shared her post, to which a neighbor commented, "This isn't the latest update. They found blood in your damn sister's home. She's a murderer. Stop trying to cover up and start telling the truth so this baby can finally rest in peace." And I think all of our jaws were on the floor. Knowing that the heat was on, Letecia took to the internet and started trying to convince her followers of her innocence. She also started pointing the fingers at anybody that she thought would take the heat off of her, mostly Gannon's biological mom, Landon. She called her a drug addict and a terrible mom and just tried to throw her under the bus in any way she could. Then Tisha really raised suspicion when she had the back-to-the-camera interview with Spencer with KKTV, where she hardly mentions Gannon. She insists that everybody, especially her husband, should apologize to her, and she continuously used the word "was" when referring to Gannon. Since the beginning, Letecia has thought she was the smartest person in the room. And one of the things that she dropped in the beginning to show that Gannon ran away was this candle video that showed that Gannon had lit a candle and then almost burnt the house down, and that he had gotten in big trouble and that this was probably the reason that he had run away. But this video backfired on Letecia big time. Everybody heard him crying and they thought that they could hear him say, "I'm bleeding," in the background. Another random piece of information that Letecia dropped was this private conversation between her and Al where they were discussing bath salts and how Gannon had been asking about them. And this is a little concerning because with Letecia, she had been giving us half-truths. So we all had to wonder, is this her way of telling us that maybe he overdosed or ingested something that he shouldn't have? And then law enforcement got a huge break in this case with the release of the video footage from the neighbor Roderick Drayton. And at first, this video footage seemed to show that Letecia and Gannon get into the truck and they leave, and then it appears that she does not come home with Gannon. But what law enforcement actually did was use that footage to make Letecia admit that she did bring Gannon home, and that actually placed her at the time and location of the crime and murder. Additionally, it appears that Letecia was caught on several different cameras as she made her voyage through Colorado Springs on Monday. And that's really important because it helped law enforcement tie together the timeline of events for Monday, and it also put her in proximity for the evidence that they found off of Perry Park Road. The search for Gannon was intense, and it seemed like investigators were starting to get close when they spent several days searching in Douglas County off of Perry Park Road. It appears that they followed Tisha's GPS to this location and then were able to find particle board that had Gannon's blood on it. So in typical Tisha fashion, she finds out about the evidence of blood and immediately takes to the internet and starts trying to make excuses for why the blood is there. She even pointed fingers at Gannon's dad, Al, saying that they had been using box cutters and he had cut himself at that point. Letecia couldn't make excuses, though, for the amount of times that Crime Lab continued to show back up at the Stauch home. Over and over again, the neighbors reported that Crime Lab was back, they were collecting evidence, and we knew that the state had something big when District Attorney Dan May came over. And then, on March 2nd, 2020, even though Gannon had not been found, investigators had enough evidence to arrest Letecia Stauch in South Carolina, and she did not go easily. She incurred several more charges on her transport from South Carolina to Colorado. When Letecia was arrested, her arrest affidavit was leaked, and that was a huge problem in and of itself. But what we learned is that Letecia provided authorities with 4 new stories for what had happened to Gannon. Number 1 being that an abductor had taken him, and 2, 3, and 4 involved a gentleman named Quincy Brown. And it should be noted that Quincy Brown is a real person, but authorities believe that Letecia Googled him off the most wanted list. The initial charges against Letecia included murder in the first degree, child abuse, tampering with a deceased human body, and tampering with physical evidence. So we knew that investigators believed that Letecia had murdered Gannon and then moved his body. But I think we were all shocked when his body was located March 17, 2020 in Pace, Florida, under the Escambia River Bridge by a construction worker. And although the search for Gannon's body was now over, we just had more and more questions about what happened to Gannon. How did Letecia have the time to get him all the way to Pace, Florida? Weren't authorities watching her? It just didn't make a lot of sense, but we did find out that authorities added 9 new charges, 1 new first-degree murder charge, and 8 crime of violence charges that basically were for the injuries found on Gannon's body. Since being arrested, Letecia's story has again changed. She's now pointing the fingers at Gannon's dad, Al, and a friend of theirs supposedly named Edgar. She's been writing letters to a YouTuber named Kit Kat and to Leigh Egan from True Crime Society, and basically what she's saying now is that she was just covering for Gannon's dad the entire time, and that he's the one that should be incarcerated for manslaughter because he owed money to Edgar, and that's what led to Gannon's disappearance. So at this point, guys, it's hard to say what story we're going to hear in the future. It should be noted that Letecia also wrote a letter to Judge Werner explaining her education level, her knowledge of her rights, and the fact that she believes that her rights are being violated while in jail. Ironically, this was sent to the judge after the state ordered a competency hearing for Letecia to evaluate if she's competent enough to stand trial. She did pass the first competency evaluation, and the defense has ordered a second competency evaluation. The second competency evaluation was supposed to be back to the judge on January 2nd. However, Dr. Grimmett has now asked for 5 additional days, so it should be back to the judge by mid-January. Most recently, Letecia was in court on December 18th, where she stared at the walls and the ceiling, and she played with the lights as if she'd never seen them before. So I think we're only beginning to see what desperation can do, and I think it's anybody's guess where these antics will lead. So it's been almost a year since Gannon's life was taken, and we still have a little ways to go before we're going to see justice served. But I'm confident that Letecia will stand trial and that justice will be served. So I'll continue to keep you posted on all the newest things to come. Anyone who followed this case knows I only scratched the surface with this video. We had new information coming out for the first 3 or 4 months of this case. But trust me, even a year in, I'm certain that there's plenty more to come. So let's continue to pray for justice for Gannon. Thanks for watching.